Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about selections in Photoshop and how we turn those selections into masks that we can use with adjustment layers. So we talked a little bit about using brush tool to do simple but effective and direct masking techniques onto adjustment layers so we can make local adjustments. But sometimes those masks need to be more complex, and a nice brush tool doesn't quite do the trick. So how do we deal with that? Okay, so in some situations that works really well, a landscape or something like that. But sometimes other type of situations like this portrait, maybe this photograph of a sign, some areas like the trees down in here are much more complicated, and it can be more useful to have other types of selection mechanisms. So that's what we're going to talk about, selection tools. So to begin with, most of our selection tools are going to be over here in the top part of my tool palette. So the Marquee Tools, the Lasso Tools, the Magic Wand, Quick Selection Tool. These are the areas where we're going to spend time. So the Marquee Tool is pretty straightforward. You come in, make a selection. When you want to get rid of a selection or you're not happy with a selection, you can push Command D or go up to Select. The Select menu has a lot of the selection controls that we'll be using all the time. The Lasso tool seems like a very silly tool, but it's actually very useful, and it can be supplemented with another selection tool to make it much more useful. Um, so it's just a freehand selection tool. So if you want to select an area like that. Now, the other thing to notice about selection tools is you can add to this selection or you can subtract from the selection. So up in the top in our options bar for the tool, there's a standard set of these four things where we have the main selection, or if you want to make a new selection, you can do that. Then the addition, add to selection, the subtract from selection, or the intersect with selection. So for example, the most useful is the add to and subtract. So if I wanted to add to the selection and make it bigger, I could click on this, and then anything else that I lasso will be added to that selection, and I can do it in pieces, and I can just keep adding on to it like this. If I wanted to subtract, it's the same idea. It's just pulling things away. So I can just continue to subtract part of my selection as I need to. There's quick keys for this. The option key creates the minus. So if I focus in here, you can see my little lasso icon. And if I hold down option key or alt key on a PC, I'll get the minus. And then that will be removing selection. Whereas if I hit the shift key on a Mac or PC, I will get the plus, and then I can add to the selection as I need to. Okay, so that's going to be the case for all of these tools, whether you're using Lasso Tool, Marquee Tool, the Quick Brush Tool. If we change these things around, we can add and make a selection, and then if I hold down the option key, I can decrease that selection. And so it's really useful to know that quick key, because then you're not coming up here and clicking and pasting and all of that. So let's continue on. So this set of tools, or I'll just show you also under the Lasso tool, we have multiple types of lasso tools. A polygonal lasso tool is just something that allows you to draw very geometric lines. It draws straight lines from point to point. So if you wanted to make some kind of geometry like this, you can do that much easier versus the freehand tool. The magnetic lasso tool is kind of interesting. This can, if you pull it along an edge, it's pretty good at finding that edge, and it saves you some time. You don't have to be perfect because it's looking for the nearest edge. You can see here it's kind of getting off. It's not totally following it. It works in some ways very similar to the quick selection tool, but when you come back, you can double click on it when you're done, and then it'll create a selection as long as you've filled out the lasso. Um, the quick selection tool is very useful. So we can look at this. You basically just use it as a brush. You can increase your brush size, either coming here, kind of treat it like a brush. You can change not only the size, but the hardness. Um, and you come in, you just start painting. So if I wanted to select this whole side, could come in here and I could start selecting it. And we get the marching ants, and it starts to selecting, and it's looking for like kind of natural color boundaries like this. Now, whenever you're making a selection, sometimes it's nice to see the opposite of selection as a mask. And you can always go in the quick mask mode in Photoshop. The way to do that is all the way down at the tools section. You're going to have this little icon over here. There it is. It says edit in the quick mask mode. And when you click on that, what it's going to do is it's going to create everything that's selected will be clear, and everything that's not selected will be, quote, masked, and it'll put a color overlay on it. Right now I've got that to be green. If I wanted to change that to a different color, I could just double click on the quick mask icon. It'll pull this up as an option, and I can click on this color, and I can come and I can change it to a different color. The most standard of the standard color is red. So again, you hit the Q key. You can come down here and click on this, or you can use the Q key to go in and out of the the quick mask mode. So I'm in, then I toggle, I'm back out. Just realize that when you're in the quick mask mode, there's another advantage of using the quick mask mode, and that is that you can now use a brush tool to increase or decrease this. So if I now, go to the brush tool, now I can paint. If I have my black, will paint additional mask on. You can see I'm now masking into this, or I can flip my color to white, and I can paint the mask off. Now, just like the brush adjustment tool layer, if you're used to using the brush tool to paint a mask on an adjustment layer, this works exactly the same. So this allows you to kind of combine, again, selection tools with kind of this painting style. So it's your choice. You don't have to do this, but it gives you an extra layer of fine tuning it, if you want to think about it that way. And of course, you have to adjust the opacity layer if I want to go up to 100%, if I wanted to take everything off. Of course, you may not want to. You may want to partially select something. So that's part of the reason why the quick mask tool can be very useful. So then you can come back out of this. And if you were happy with this, then you could come and, for example, if I wanted to make an adjustment layer, make this sign, let's just say a different saturation, I could go to hue saturation, and I would create the hue saturation adjustment layer. And by automatically, it takes my active selection and turns it into my mask, right? So here's my mask, and so everything that's white will be affected, everything that's black will not. And now I would just have to adjust, say, the saturation. So if I wanted to decrease the saturation, like that, it's done right away. It's very easy. Of course, you could tell my mask is not perfect, right? Because I'm kind of fiddled with it in the quick selection tool. So if I wanted to, I could go back and fix that even inside my adjustment layer. I could come in here to this, and I could paint just like I was with the brush tool, and I could paint this out and kind of fine tune it, make sure I was happy with it, like something like this. Or so we have a lot of choices, but hopefully that helps gives you a sense of how we can use these selection tools. Now, there's a couple other selection tools I want to just go over. Let's kind of go back here. So another selection tool is the magic wand tool. So the magic wand tool can be used in two ways, and it's important to go up to the top and look at the options. And there's one really important one up here. Well, there's a couple important settings up here. One is this continuous check mark. If you click contiguous, it means that we'll only select things that are in the tonal range that you select, as long as they're touching, means that they're contiguous to each other, they're touching. So if I click on, for example, the sky here, it's gonna get all of the sky in here, but notice this power line and it stops. It doesn't go to the sky in this area because it's not contiguous technically, because this black line is separating it. If I wanted not only this part of the sky, but these parts to be selected, I would need to unclick contiguous and then click again. And now you can see not only this upper part, but these areas in here are also selected. So you can see these are selected, whereas before they were not. So that's one important part of the magic wand tool. The other is, you can see up here that we also have something called tolerance. And this is basically the power, or the how much of the tonal range do you want me to select when you click. Okay, so I've got it at 32. The tolerance ranges from 0 to 255. So if I try to put in, say, 1,000, it's going to give me an error. It says integer between 0 and 255. That's based off 8-bit color bit depth. So that doesn't really matter, but that's where it comes from. And so if I select 255, that basically would means like, I want you to select all tonal ranges from black to white, okay? Based off whatever tonal range. It's thinking about not colors as much as tonal range. So if I select 255, the entire thing will be selected. There'll be nothing masked out. If I select 0, it's not going to select hardly anything. It's only going to select the exact same color. So here it's 0, it's the most selective. You can see it's very minimal when it's selecting. If instead I did 10, then we'll click in the same place, and now you can see that my selection is wider, because this sky here, right, is basically one kind of total range, but it's slightly darker as I go up towards the zenith of the sky, and then as I come down to the horizon, it gets a bit brighter. So the higher that tolerance range is, the more that's going to be selected. So you'll notice that the magic wand tool and the quick selection tool are kind of in the same palette, right? Or they're on the same tool, and it's like they're subtools. The quick selection tool is a bit more intuitive. You gotta click where you want. But for example, it might work pretty well in areas that are well defined. And of course, you might have to go back in and subtract areas that aren't so obvious, and you can go back and forth like this and create a good situation. But if you come over here to, say, this tree, it might do an okay job, but you'll notice one of the problems with the quick selection tool in this situation is it's really hard to get. If I wanted to really select these trees, it's a bit difficult because it sort of starts to kind of it's kind of blocky. You can see that here. You can, it's like, that's not such a great selection of that tree. So what could I do about that? Well, just to give you an example, we could use the magic wand tool, and instead of clicking, we could just click on this. And now you can see it's a bit more particular, a bit more selective. Now we have a pretty low tolerance, so I might increase my tolerance to, say, 32, and then come in here and click. And now we're getting a little bit more. But you see, one of the problems is, because this is really based on just tonality, that I'm not only getting the tree here, but I'm also starting to get parts of the sign, similar tonality ranges, okay? So here's one of the magics about selections that you want to know about. I can use these selection tools in combination with each other. They're not exclusive. So let's say we wanted to do a better job of selecting this tree. One thing I could do before I use this magic wand tool is I could use my lasso tool. And I could just select the larger area where the trees are. Now I'm going to hold down the Shift key so I can select the second part where the trees are. Go back and fix this here. So now I have like a two tree areas, right? They're just rough selection. And now what I can do is I can switch over to my Magic Wand tool. And now I'm going to subtract. In this case, I'm going to subtract from the selection. And I'm going to click on the sky, the areas around it. And as I do that, I'm getting a kind of a more restrictive space. And so now if you could look at this, I'm getting pretty darn close. It's not perfect, but it's much better than I was getting before. You can see that I just have a little bit of these areas here that aren't quite jiving all the way. But again, it's still pretty good. In some sense, it's like, so I could continue to come in and try to click off, click down into some of these areas. I could also notice there's some kind of extraneous little bits here that I might decide I don't want, and I'll have to decide how I want to handle those. I could just go back and use my Lasso tool and subtract that like this. And that's one really useful thing that the Lasso tool sometimes does. You notice that here I've still got this black area selected from this sign or this roof. If I don't really want that, I could just come in here and carefully use my mouse tool and kind of select that away. So lots of little options. And of course, we don't want to forget that once I have a decent selection, I'm happy with it, then I could come in and I could make an adjustment. So if I wanted to do, say, a brightness contrast adjustment onto the trees, I could come in here and I could brighten those up a little bit like that. So those are the most important selection tools. It gives you a sense of how you use it and how you also can turn that selection very easily into a adjustment layer mask.